Whoops, let me get rid of this. Sorry, y'all. Hey, this is a reminder that you have your Learning Assignment 3 that is going to be due on July 8th, and you'll want to be sure and take a look at the rubric and see how you're going to be scored on that. Learning exercises are meant to be a little bit challenging. I think this one is a little bit more than maybe what we've done in the past, or maybe with some other classes. So if you'll just make sure that you're addressing everything there, I look forward to taking a look at those things there. So to continue on with Chapter 6, of course this comes from another set of slides. I just want to look at the Precede Proceed model, just because if I can be a little geeky, and it's one of the things that's kind of nice about community health, I love this process. And for some of you have already been exposed to this, and it's like, oh my God, we're going to talk about this again, because this is really all that we seem to do, especially when we are thinking about planning these things out. But for some of you, this might be brand new, and so I want to make this worthwhile for you. And so if you take a look, this looks a little intimidating. Let me move that over here. So, but this is a model which we use in community and behavioral health a lot. So Precede, which is just predisposing, reinforcing, and enabling constructs in educational, ecological diagnosis and evaluation. That's a big mouthful. And then you've got Proceed, policy, regulatory, organizational constructs in educational and environmental development. In this model, it looks a little complicated, but I promise you, all you're going to do is you're going to follow this phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 4B, and then you go down here with phase 5, 6, and 7. This is talked about in your textbook. There's some good information listing out there, but keep this in mind, because this will not lead you wrong. And so this is how you would want to do something like this. So Precede and Proceed. So you're going to do a social diagnosis. You're going to kind of look at an ecological perspective, the social determinants of health. You're going to look at quality of life and social factors surrounding main health problems or challenges. So a lot of this is where you're doing your homework, and so this is why we want you to do a lit review. So it's concerned with, you're going to gather some data, you're going to review existing information regarding the health of particular population or populations. So, well, where do I get that? So you can go through census data, you can go there, you can get like employment rates, healthcare services, education, crime, housing, parks, recreation, all those kinds of things. Maybe also you are going to do some information regarding environmental assessments. What are some observation? What about stakeholder interviews? These important people within your communities that can give you some background information, especially if you're not a part of the community. What about social capital? That's a whole other area, but that is also something. And then also, what about ranking health issues, or seeing maybe a particular health issue in context? It's really easy, especially if you're not part of a population, that maybe your thoughts on a particular health issue are seen maybe not the same way by the people that you're trying to help. So, issues of morbidity, mortality, functioning, years of potential loss, all these kinds of things. And so all of this is related to particular communities, because you're just looking at quals. You're wanting to assess general problems that diminish quality of life. And so you have some phases. So, your phase 1, your social assessment, you're going to define your health behaviors, your problems and your priorities. You kind of did that with your statement of a problem. You're going to consider how these health behaviors affect long-term desired outcomes, such as quality of life, such as happiness, such as life satisfaction. And you may be thinking, well, happiness and quality of life, life satisfaction, these are things that we do find important, because think about any time that if you've ever done a patient satisfaction survey, if you've gone in to see your doctor, what does this sound like? So maybe you've had some experiences that way within your own hospital thing. So you can also look about regarding one aspects of social determinants of health. So you're going to determine people's perceptions of their own needs, or their quality of life and their aspirations. What do people want? What do people look forward to? What's the common good? And of course, you want to do this through broad participation. You don't want to be very narrowly focused, because you want a lot of input. So really, what you're trying to do is just expand what you know about your community in particular. And a lot of this is based upon social and economic indicators and quality of life indicators as well. And so when we think about quals, going back that again, self-reported measures of physical and mental health may be problems and or cultural needs of a given population. What's the perception of people? That's why you're talking to people within the community. Are their needs being satisfied? Are they not being denied opportunities? Can they pursue happiness and fulfillment? It's also going to include what people value. And sometimes these don't relate directly to health, but there's always ways to make connections with that. Overall sense of well-being. And, of course, you can go back to our good friend Maslow, and so this can be related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs there. And so here are some examples of what we might be looking for as social indicators and quality of life concerns. And so you can kind of take a look at this. Maybe these are the things that you're interested from, and these would be ways for you to kind of process that. Phase 2, you've got an You've got an epidiagnosis, let's just put it that way. And so you're looking for prevalence and incidence of health conditions, comorbidity in affected populations. And this way you're kind of looking at this in more of a depth. And so what kind of groups are disproportionately affected? And maybe you want to break this out by age, gender, SES, rural, urban, race, ethnicity. And there, of course, you're going to be looking at data, and you can get this from local, state, national surveillance data. It goes back to your statement of problem. What kind of data did you get from either a national, a state, or a local to kind of define your issues? And so what you're wanting to do there is to kind of see some patterns. You want to acquire your data, and of course when we think about acquiring data, there's always primary and secondary data. And so primary data it's data that you collect yourself. And so a lot of times you're doing surveys, you're doing focus groups, you're doing interviews. And so you might be coming up with these questions, or maybe you found an instrument that actually works really well, and so why recreate the wheel? So the advantage is that you're actually getting answers to the questions that you're most concerned about. The disadvantage, it can be expensive. It can take a lot of time. And so maybe you have that time, maybe you don't. Secondary data, it's just data that somebody else has already accumulated for you for whatever reasons, and it's available to you. And oftentimes, there's not a charge for that, and especially if you're using some of the more national based data. The disadvantage is that maybe it's not answering the questions that you're actually looking to have answered, and so it doesn't have you in mind on that. But it's it's already there, and it's fairly inexpensive. So breaking down your sources of primary data, there's lots of information, of course, self-reported surveys, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that. There's also proxy measures that you can take a look at. You can have community forums, you can have focus groups, you can have self-assessments, and even sometimes, especially with qualitative, you'll do some observation, whether it's direct or indirect. Good kind of stuff there. And then, of course, you have your secondary data sources, and, maybe you're going to get that information from a governmental agency or an NGO. Maybe there's some records or reports, or even just through your literature search, maybe sometimes even brochures and pamphlets. These are nice ways to kind of acquire that information. Then you've also got phase 3. You've got a behavioral diagnosis and also an environmental diagnosis, which one of these is internal, one of these is external. And so the end result of this is some behavioral objectives. And your data there can come from literature reviews, local surveys, assessing environment. You can get data from health departments if you know how to navigate that, community groups and work sites. So there's lots of information there. Then you have your educational diagnosis. What are your predisposing? What are your reinforcing? What are your enabling factors that are listed out there? And you can kind of figure out from this information what needs to be the focus of your intervention. And so maybe your data is coming from focus groups, maybe from interviews with your priority population. Maybe you're going to interview some of your stakeholders, the people that you feel like know a lot about the community. Community members, directors, healthcare administrators, all of these things can kind of come into play. And then you even would want to even kind of break this down into predisposing, reinforcing, and enabling. And so it gives you some examples here of these things that you would want to kind of keep in mind. What about knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs? We always go through that. What about social support? What about economic rewards? What about social norms? What about skills? What about environmental and policy supports? What about affordability of services? There's lots of different ways that you can get this information, but you would want to keep this in mind as well, too, as you're gathering your data. So there is a hierarchy of acquisition, and so, look at this, your knowledge or experience, your beliefs, and your values go to your attitudes, which goes into skills, which, then comes through with behaviors. So keep this in mind. Your beliefs are a conviction that something is true. It's faith, it's trust, it's truth. Your values, this kind of underpins your sense of right and wrong. We're not looking to change values, but sometimes maybe we can use this to kind of point out discrepancies between values and behaviors or environments. And then, of course, your attitudes, your collections of belief that include an evaluative aspect. And then skills, your ability to perform a task, and so on and so on. Number 5, administrative and policy assessment. You are going to do stakeholder interviews here. You're going to have meetings with boards to propose programs and ask for support. You are going to look for types of resources. Okay. And then phase 6, proceed. You're going to have program implementation. And in other words, you are going to actually have this take place. Then after you implement this, you need to have some process evaluation. And that process evaluation will, you're going to check fidelity. Is everything done the same way so that we can be sure of our measurements? What about dosage? What about people attending? What about activities that you've had? And so maybe some of this data, think about this for your logic model, is that, checklists, observations, debriefing sessions, timelines. Look and see then phase 8, impact. Assessing changes in knowledge and behaviors. These are usually short-term things that occur, using a pre or post survey. And then what are your outcomes? Identifying changes in health. Maybe you want to do some data surveys to follow up through time. Now, this I'm getting here, and I'll go, this is real quick. This is also out on detail, but they've given you an example of a logic model. And these logic models, we want you to use this particular template. Don't come up with your own. Don't recreate it. So you've got your inputs, your activities, your outputs, short-term, mid-term, long-term. You have your goals. So what are you going to call your intervention? What kinds of things do you have for inputs? In other words, what kind of items are you going to have? What resources? What people? What kind of activities are you going to develop through your intervention? What kind of outputs? What are you producing? And then, beginning with outputs, look down here, you've got data sources. So, and we're looking for you to have data sources, because how do you know if your intervention is actually working, or is there a confluence of something else that's going on? So, especially if you're looking for funding, you really kind of need to know this. So, short term, everybody should have short term, mid-term, and long term. And then what is your ultimate goal? What do we need to know? And again, there's our friend Precede and Proceed. You're really pretty much aware of that, and this is where your program planning. So you're actually doing this, you're thinking about your intervention, and here's where you do your implementation. I know this was quick. Your book will do a much better job of kind of setting this up for you, but this is very important. Use this. It's very tested. Thanks.